So, wir sind.
Hi, I'm Scott Marlowe, and I play the lead in the film Test.
And my name's Chris Mason Johnson. I'm the writer-director of Test, with Scott Marlowe playing the lead. He plays a dancer in a dance company in San Francisco in 1985, a time of great music and the first Walkman that he wears in the movie. And also his story takes place against a very serious backdrop, which is the early years of the AIDS epidemic.
Hey, what are you doing tonight?
I don't know, I'm just gonna go home.
You want to get high?
High?
No.
What?
No! Yes, that's what it's about.
Jerry says it's not about that.
What does he know?
He made the dance.
It's about anonymous gay sex. That's why I had to butch it up. That's why, you know, it's just so that it doesn't look gay.
You said it is gay.
It denies it's gay. It's a metaphor.
I don't know what a metaphor is.
A metaphor? It's like...
No one wants to see a boy dance like a fairy. That's why you had to butch it up.
Well, you had a screening here, but did you also have a screening before that in the United States, or was it world premiere?
No, this is European premiere.
Okay.
We did Outfest. We won 2 grand jury awards at Outfest in LA, and we did Palm Springs, and then we played in Taipei and Hong Kong. But this is European premiere.
Mm-hmm. How were the reactions in the United States and Asia?
Asia, I wasn't there. United States, we did really well. We got great reviews and we won awards. And it was slow at first, but then once Outfest got those 2 awards, it sort of took off, and it's been good.
Okay. And you liked the discussions and everything afterwards, or there were discussions, I guess?
Well, there were, and they were a little more, well, because it takes place in America, and I do think there's a cultural difference with the AIDS epidemic historically, what happened in this time and place and all that. So that actually, I don't really know. I would have to do more research to find out exactly, do some of the things translate? You know, there was a lot of homophobic scapegoating in America. There was, and it was in the press, and it was a really frightening moment. There was literally talk of a quarantine, you know, what would the government do with your information? And I don't know if all of that translates exactly over here. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. To be honest, I'm too young to remember that, so
Right.
I don't really know that. But I would say probably not. I think it was different here, especially because it was first in the United States and very big there, and we got the news.
Right.
And then when we had the first cases here, it was a different perception because it happened before somewhere else. So the discussion was at a different point, I think.
Right.
But,
And I think, so maybe there was also more information, I'm not sure, but you know, those early years, there really wasn't information, and people didn't know, could you get it from food, could you get it from mosquitoes, could you get it from handshakes, sweat, you know, all that.
Mm. Well, you convey that in the movie as well. You have discussions about that. And for example, your character says that he's scared that the parents will find out by him dying, and that they are scared to share food, drinks, and so forth with him if they would know if he had been infected.
Right, there's that whole line about being terrified to eat in the Castro,
Yeah.
which is the neighborhood in San Francisco.
Because it could be like hepatitis in the food, yeah.
Or the scene where the other guy is dancing and he's sweating a lot, and you could sort of feel the fear of the other people to get in contact with him because he might have something. And yeah, this whole atmosphere of fear is very
Palpable.
Yeah, exactly.
Palpable. No, that's French. How do you say palpable in German?
Fassbar.
Fassbar.
say,
Yes,
yeah.
es ist fassbar. Genau, genau.
So why did you decide to get that onto tape? Why did you decide to keep those memories?
Well, I think that I think that there's a way that history makes everything very clean and neat, you know, and we know it from the history of the wars too. You know, everything becomes very clear. How could people not have known this happens and this happens? And in hindsight, it's all like a history book. But what was lost was the feeling of being in this kind of fog of war, if you will, or in this kind of bubble where you don't know. You know, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know how long something's going to last or how big it's going to be. And just the details of being in that moment are human details that are ephemeral and specific, and they're good for fiction, but they don't really have a place in history books. You know, so I wanted to capture that tone and that feeling.
But do you have the feeling that you were sort of part of this history, or is it rather you looking back at a certain point of history and doing research on it?
Well, it's both. It's like, I think anyone who watches period movies for a time that they were alive, you know, I'm sure when those 90s movies start coming out in 2020, you're going to look back at them and like, oh, it wasn't like that in 1990. You know, so you'll have that feeling. And I know my mother has that feeling when she watches TV shows set in the 1960s. She's like, I can't watch that. It wasn't like that. So I do think there's, the artist might have this sense that you want to capture the essence of something that was in an era that you haven't seen done. You know, and we'd seen 1980s films, Hollywood stuff like The Wedding Singer, where it's all happy, and then I've seen deathbed movies from the AIDS era where it's all tragedy, but I hadn't seen the two worlds together. You know, there was dancing, there was fun, there was great music, you know, and there was also this epidemic in the background. You know, and fiction tends to segregate these modes, and I wanted to put them together. But to answer your question, I think it's both a memory and a witness, simultaneously.
Isn't that also a way of dealing with history for you? To shoot a movie and to, well, put it into a shape that you can deal with?
I think absolutely. I mean, I think that lots of filmmakers and novelists do that. It's a very organic process. So I absolutely set out to I just said, you know, all right, I'm not going to make something to sell. You know, in America, we don't have film funds and co-productions, so it's much harder to raise money. So when you set out to write a screenplay, you're always thinking, can I raise money for this? Will it be commercial? And in this case, I just said, no, you know, I've wasted a lot of time trying to make commercial things that didn't get funded. That happens to everyone. So I'm just gonna, I'm gonna do something very personal, and we'll see what happens. So it's like a journal, you start in that way, or semi-autobiographical, So yeah, that is a way of dealing with it.
So it is a very personal movie.
It's very personal, yeah.
Okay. And how was it for you to approach your role? I mean, did you do historical research on the topic? Did you talk with people from that time?
I did, because I grew up with the history book version of this period. So what I did is I read books, I watched documentaries like We Were Here. I spoke to family members who were there in San Francisco at that time, and just sort of tried to get not so much a history lesson of it, but really trying to tease out what it must have felt like to be inside of not knowing, inside of that foggy world where you don't have hindsight at all.
How would you say that the whole AIDS crisis changed the gay community? I know it's a big question.
It's big. I mean, it's a huge question. I mean, that's lots of subjects in there. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I'd have to double check, but I think ACT UP initially started in part around fears and questions about testing. Would the government have that information, etc.? And that's a subject in the film. They're talking about it. They're afraid to do it because will there be a list? Will there be, etc.? So I think the epidemic spurred political activism, and that created organizations that have then translated into marriage equality and translated into all kinds of action, right? So it gave us an infrastructure for political action, even stronger and bigger than we had. And I think that's one way, you know.
So the AIDS crisis was in a way also the starting point for political activism, gay political activism?
Yes, I mean, it's a little more complicated because there was the whole Stonewall riots moment in New York, Compton's cafeteria, I think it was in San Francisco. There was the Mattachine Society before that in the late 50s and early 60s. So there was a history of activism prior to AIDS, but it took on a kind of different and bigger aspect after AIDS.
Well, you combine the whole AIDS crisis and this atmosphere of fear with the dancing company, which is sort of like an atmosphere of actually, well, it is stressful to dance and everything, you show that as well, but it's also artistic, it's fun in a way, it's what people want to do, it's a lot of passion involved.
Sensual.
And, yeah, very sensual. Why did you combine those two?
Lots of reasons again. I mean, one thing is the eroticization of the body. I mean, it's not something that a typical sort of Camille-like deathbed movie will investigate, the eroticization of the diseased body, right? But it is the body that gets sick, right? It is the body that has sex. It is the body that is beautiful and that dances. It's all the same thing, right? So eroticizing that body and putting the sex in the movie, because there's not a lot of sex in movies that deal with HIV, right? So it was all about bringing the erotic back into the formulation instead of sanitizing it and saying, here's a sick homosexual who's dying, don't we all feel sad? Instead of that, it was, here's a world of sexy, vibrant young men. This is what happened to them, you know?
Yeah, this body thing, I think you see also very clear when you stand in front of the mirror checking if you have something on your skin and so forth. That really shows how much the body is affected, and that also affects the minds though of the people, especially because everyone is scared and yeah.
But he still has sex. He
Yeah.
still gets around.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. That is another thing I found interesting in the movie. And that is also something I have to say I found a bit critical because I wasn't sure how to take it when they had the discussions about condoms and they were saying like, yeah, this is going to be the end of sex. And to me, that was not really promoting to have sex with condoms, which is...
Well, but the end of the scene, they do, and it's good. Yeah. So that was just a little...
Okay, so you're trying to use the pictures to say it's good anyways with condoms and the doubts beforehand.
Yeah, I think the overall message is fairly positive and, you know, correct if we're talking propaganda. But in terms of the dramatic moment, there was this thing that nobody had used since the birth control pill came in. They were very old-fashioned, and suddenly these young men who would never think of doing, because nobody can get pregnant, you know, why would you, right? So, yeah, I wanted to represent realistically the introduction of this thing into that culture. But in the end, I think they have a nice time together, and they do use condoms.
And enjoy it.
Yes. But I think underneath your question is the deeper thing of, is a younger generation stopped using them?
That
right?
would have been my next question.
Yeah. No, and that is a problem. And I do think the film is maybe useful in that it starts that conversation. You know, I'm not writing a pamphlet. It's not propaganda. It's fiction. But I do think it starts that conversation. You know.
Did you have the feeling it starts that conversation when you were in the Q&As?
To a degree. I mean, there was actually a friend of mine in Austin at the screening who brought his friend who's younger than I am and who has AIDS. And just seeing that film and listening to everyone...
HIV positive.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, it's an important distinction.
Thank you. You know, it had him really, really emotional thinking about the moment prior to his knowledge and just relating to the film in that way. It's just
With condoms.
With condoms, and it's interesting to me to look at the population now, and from my personal experience, it's people who are older than I am and actually who are younger than I am who are coming up HIV positive right now.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because the older people who were there and were frightened, sort of scared straight, we might say, and that's a bad pun. But and then the middle generation who also is now old enough to have had a moment of fear that was strong enough. You know, it's like fire. It's like touching fire, right? And the younger generation who now have these drugs you can take to like kill it the next day. So they're barebacking with while taking these drugs. So therefore they can have unsafe, unprotected sex. That whole culture is younger than him, and that's really problematic to me. I mean, that's
scary.
It is, yeah.
But is there no propaganda about that in the United States? That, I don't know, the states say, well, use condoms, or that there is education in school about that?
Yeah, but it all becomes so like.
Well, I feel like
tune
it was
out.
really strong for my generation.
Right.
And I don't know because I'm not
In school.
anymore. But I have the sense that it's sort of
There's a
waned.
Yeah, I think there's a new wave of a problem, and we don't quite know what it is yet. Yeah.
Well, I hope that your movie leads to those discussions and makes more people aware and that people use condoms. And I thank you very much for the interview.
Thank you. Yeah,
Thanks.
thanks.
Thanks.